Hello everybody and welcome back to LRN, your home of F1 news and fan opinion. We react to all of the latest news headline stories coming out of the world of F1, and of course the 22 season has only just ended, but the news from the F1 circus continues to come out in force. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel to be notified of all future uploads, as we'll be discussing all of the latest news that comes out of the world of F1 through the off season and of course into next year as well. We've got a whole bunch of stories to cover off today, with updates on obviously Alonso's move to Aston Martin. Alonso's been making comments. We've also got an update from Ricardo to Red Bull, as Ricardo's made some sort of comments on why he is that he's potentially looking to move to Red Bull, and what he needed to be able to agree to that in the first place. We've had Toto Wolff and Mick Schumacher come out and make comments around the sort of rumoured position of Mick Schumacher going to Mercedes as their reserve driver. Of course, Ricardo was their number one choice, but he's now essentially moved back to Red Bull, so it does leave the door open for Mick, and both Toto and Mick have made comments around that story and what they expect to happen. And we've also had comments from Hulkenberg as well. Quick bit of news though is that the next year's calendar has gone down to 23 races. We were due a record-breaking 24, but China has now had to drop off of the calendar for the 2023 season due to COVID restrictions. So we will be down to 23 races. That is still more than enough, in my opinion, for an F1 calendar season. I think 24 is probably too much, if I'm being completely honest, but 23 races are still enough. It's still a record-breaking year in terms of volume of races in a season, so still plenty of us for us as fans to get into and get excited about, but we won't be going back to China in 2023 due to the COVID restrictions essentially preventing a proper Grand Prix weekend taking place. So that has been taken off the calendar, but as I say, we've still got, at the moment at least, 23 races to look forward to, so hopefully they'll stay as well. We'll kick off though with comments being made by Alonso now that he's had a chance to have his first go in the Aston Martin, and his feeling around his move to Aston, which we kind of presumed he was going to be happy about, right? We know how unhappy he was in Alpine. We know how unhappy he was with Ocon as his teammate, and the comments in general, the feeling on the radio, you could just sense for a while now that he couldn't wait to get out of Alpine, despite the fact he's been driving brilliantly, in my opinion, towards the end of the season. So it certainly didn't hamper his willingness to do well for the team, and he's a proper professional in that sense. But clearly he was looking forward to making the move, and there was a reason, of course, that he agreed to move to Aston Martin. But following his first outing in the Aston, he's had some key comments and said, "When I signed for Aston Martin in July, I was 90% happy. When they started improving and they finished the season on a high, I was 100%. This morning, I was 100%. Now I'm 100% plus." So Alonso, having had a go in the car, even happier that he's sort of actually realising that the car isn't bad at all. It's competitive. And as we go into more comments from him, you'll realise that he genuinely doesn't seem too much of a difference between the Aston and the Alpine. So he's gone on to say, "So it was nice to feel the differences a little bit, and now to try and understand what is the best way. Next year, the car's going to be nearly new on everything, so there is not much point really to develop this idea much or anything like that. It was more about controls and other things." So he spent the day essentially getting used to the car, getting himself fitted, getting his seat fitted, making adjustments to the cockpit where necessary, because of course he's new to the team. So it really is about comfort for him. As he said, it's going to be essentially a brand new car next year for Aston Martin, so lots and lots of change. Exciting that we're going to sort of have another reset on the grid in terms of how teams come to the grid next season and where they're going to be in the pecking order. Unlike previous years, it's not going to be a simple case of a little bit of evolution of where the cars were before in terms of the previous regulations. I think there's still huge amounts to learn with these new regs, and if teams get on top of them, they could make serious gains or fall down the grid quite drastically if they get it right or get it wrong. So going to be another exciting pre-season heading into 2023, and of course into the season proper, because I do think there could be some serious shifts on the grid next season, and what Alonso's saying there is definitely alluding to that. He's then gone on to say, "So I don't think it was much of a difference between Aston Martin and Alpine at the weekend. I felt basically the same as well. I felt a very competitive car. Both Aston Martins finished in the points, so it was a good car anyway. So we know that across the season, Alpine had a much better year than Aston Martin did, finishing in fourth, of course, in the constructors. But what he's saying, and I think what we've actually seen, especially towards the end of the season, is that Aston Martin upgraded their car quite a lot. They definitely, whether it's to do with setups or mainly to do with upgrades brought to the car, massive improvements, and Vettel especially managed to get a huge amount out of the Aston Martin in the previous races. Other than the strategy at Abu Dhabi, I think he drove brilliantly well, and there was definitely performance in the car, and we saw that a little bit from Stroll in that race as well. So Alonso's come in, he's tried the car, and he's basically saying, look, there's not a huge difference between these two cars. The Aston Martin is decent, and we go on to the fact that, of course, they're going to expect to make huge changes for 2023. I think Aston Martin have a lot of fans, have a lot to look forward to. I think Alonso is thinking, you know what, this car, they've had, by their standards, a poor season, but the car at the end of it's not that bad. And given the amount of time they're putting into upgrading and improving on these regulations, and the amount of budget and the amount of the infrastructure Aston Martin have with their wind tunnel and their operational side is huge. So they could potentially make massive strides up the grid. And I think this is one of the reasons Alonso's wanted to go to Aston Martin, just because he knows that behind the scenes it's a really strong outfit. So they could potentially be a team to look out for next year, and be up then. I know his main goal, we all know he wants to beat Alpine. His first goal, of course, if the car suddenly is amazing, it's incredible, his focus will quickly shift to trying to win races or win titles, because if a miracle happens, that'll be the case. But I think his minimum goal, the thing he will want to achieve more than anything, is to beat Alpine, to go up against them and beat them in the Aston Martin. And I think what he's realised is that he might have a really good chance of doing that after his first experience in the Aston with this weekend. Sorry, these few days following the Abu Dhabi GP. So fair play. I think if they can do that, it'll be massive for Alonso. Of course, Alpine will be trying to stop them, and they'll have their own plans on what they're going to do through the winter to their 2023 car to prevent teams like Aston Martin being able to go past them on the grid next season. But he's feeling confident. He feels like he's made the right decision. He's more than 100% happy. So expect Alonso to have, at least at this moment, a pretty good season next year, with Aston Martin looking strong. Hopefully he can pull Stroll along with him, but we'll see. But for Alonso, at least, it's looking pretty positive at this very, very early stage of his Aston Martin career. Moving on then, we've got an update from Daniel Ricciardo, who's come out and made some comments about why it is that what he needed to put in place to move back to Red Bull. So Ricardo has come out and said, the highly likely place for me is Red Bull. So comments from himself confirming that he is indeed potentially set to join Red Bull again. I can't say 100% until things are signed off. So we discussed that before. The reason Red Bull will have come out and distanced themselves from it is because until things are signed, you can't confirm anything in this sport. Anything can happen, but at the moment it seems like Ricardo said that it's going to happen. Helmut Marko, of course, came out and said it was going to happen. Even Christian Horner came out at a press conference and basically said, yeah, it is happening unless he decides not to, because until he signs the thing, he can still change his mind. So that's the position that we're in. He did say, however, if it is to happen, I won't be at 24 races, otherwise I may as well still be on the grid. I made it clear that I needed time off. So those old things that we talked about around Ricardo, needing some time off, needing to reset, needing to refine his fire, needing to refine his love for the sport and his will to win, is an important part of this year off. And of course it was an enforced year off, but it was an opportunity for him after a few years of not really being that driver we all thought he was back when in his first run at Red Bull. He needs to go away and refine himself and refine his fire within him to go and win races. And hopefully he can do that. Hopefully this year, with a part-time role at Red Bull, he can still be around the paddock. He can maintain those relationships. He can go away, reset, refine the Ricardo that we all want to see. Because if he can find that, if he can go away and find the old Danny Rick, I am 100% sure that most fans will want to see him back on the grid. We all want to see that Ricardo. We just don't want to see the Ricardo that's been struggling, because frankly it's sad, because he's such a good driver, someone that we all thought generally was a potential future world champion. So to see him fall so much through those years hasn't been, it's been sad as an F1 fan, because I had so much hope for him, and I'm sure he feels the same way. So if he can go away, he can reset, he can refine the hunger, refine the fire, and come back ready to fight for, find a good seat and fight for race wins, or at least just get some semblance of form. You look at what Alonso and Vettel have done in Aston Martin and Alpine respectively. Yes, they're former world champions, but they've still managed to go to these lesser teams and show they've still got it. You don't have to be winning races to show that you are still a top driver in Formula One. You can do it by outperforming the car underneath you. And if Ricardo can just do that, even if he doesn't get a top drive, just come back to a team. Obviously McLaren would have been ideal, but it hasn't worked out there. So come back to a different team and actually get an opportunity, outperform the car, prove he can do it, and then maybe make a move down the line again to a top team and have another crack at it. Fine, fair enough. Congratulations to him. I do struggle to see where that drive's going to be. I've been through it before on the channel. I can't see where those opportunities are going to be in 2024. Pretty much all the teams look like they're already going to be locked out in terms of their driver lineup. And of course, he won't want to go. He's made it clear he doesn't want to sign for Haas. He doesn't want to sign for Williams or one of the teams at the bottom. The only team I could even potentially scrape him into was if Aston Martin chose to part ways with Zhou Guanyu. Not Aston Martin, sorry, Alfa Romeo decided to part ways with Zhou Guanyu. And I don't even know if he would want that role anyway. So really, really difficult for him to find a position. I think Mercedes reserve driver would have been an opportunity for him to stay again, but maybe they wanted someone who's there full time, and that wouldn't have fit with Daniel Ricciardo's plan to take some time away from the sport, along with the role as a reserve driver. So we'll see. But it looks all set then. He's going to be joining Red Bull. He's not going to be there all year. He's going to make the most, and his caveat is he needs time off as well. So he will be part-time around the paddock, on the screen for Red Bull. And of course, as we sort of already know, participating at Red Bull events away from F1 as well, and making the most of Daniel Ricciardo's brand. But it seems 99% done then that Daniel Ricciardo will be rejoining Red Bull. And we move on then to Toto Wolff and his backing of Mick Schumacher, and comments that Mick Schumacher has made about his potential move to Mercedes. So Toto Wolff has come out and said, we haven't even spoken sensibly. It was just something important to me to say during this difficult time for Mick, that we appreciate him. So he hasn't at this stage, they haven't sat down and had a proper conversation at this stage around the opportunity to go to Mercedes. But he has made it clear he appreciates Mick Schumacher as a driver. He goes on to say he deserves a place on the grid and not as a test driver. Perhaps there is an intermediate step in which we play a role. So more rumours are coming out at the moment that, again, we kind of knew it already, but more rumours coming out Ferrari won't want to keep him on the Ferrari driver program. And a move to Mercedes, of course, would be ideal for Mick Schumacher to stay within the sport at such a prestigious brand as well. Obviously, coming down from Ferrari, there isn't much better options to go to as your next choice than Mercedes. So if he can get it, it would be fantastic. And Toto Wolff with a really public backing there of Mick Schumacher and his talents and his belief that he belongs in the world of F1. Now, you don't know how true it is, or whether he's just trying to big the guy up because he wants to get him in as a test driver, and he wants him to feel like if he came to Mercedes as a test driver, they'd truly back him into the future. It's a way of selling it to Mick as well as an intermediate step, as Toto says. But the public backing from someone like Toto Wolff is massive for someone like Mick, especially when he's lost a seat at Haas to Nico Hulkenberg. So for me, that's huge comments there from Toto. And we've also got comments then from Mick Schumacher. It didn't feel like the last race of the season, and it didn't feel like my last race. My mind is pretty much settled on coming back in 24, if not earlier in 23. I wouldn't say I feel like I'm in a position for a full-time seat, but I do feel confident that I'll be able to get something. I feel I've shown my pace, and I know a lot of people are happy with how I've developed. So if you're putting two and two together, you could say that the people that were happy with how he's developed are people like Toto Wolff at Mercedes. In terms of he feels confident he'll be able to get something, the reserve drive at Mercedes, and looking at then a full-time drive like Daniel Ricciardo is, where he wants something, temporary for 23, a role in the sport with a view of a drive in 2024. And I think the same issues that are plaguing Daniel Ricciardo for 24 are going to plague Mick Schumacher. I do not see where that drive comes unless someone retires, or even have a couple of retirements in the sport, or someone has a terrible season and they're booted out, or something needs to happen. We could see, say, Logan Sargent. He's obviously been snapped up by Williams. He could come in and he could just not do it in F1. He could be really off the pace. He could be Nikita Mazepin off the pace in F1. So you could see Williams go, Logan, we've given you the opportunity. It's not worked out. Off you go. That could happen. You could have a Red Bull scenario where they get rid of a driver mid-season. Of course, it was Red Bull. You'd expect them to bring up someone from AlphaTauri. Nick de Vries, of course, would be the favourite. I think if Perez, as an example, was to be moved on, I don't expect that to happen at all. But we know Red Bull have done it in the past. So let's just say Perez was moved on halfway through the season. Maybe everything comes so much to blows between Perez and Verstappen that they have to make a decision, and of course Perez would lose that. Again, I'm not suggesting that's the case at all. I'm just giving you an example. De Vries would go there, and maybe that opens an opportunity for Mick and AlphaTauri. But something like that needs to happen, because if everything carries on as we think it's going to at the moment, there's not going to be a seat on the grid in 2024, and there's certainly not going to be any new teams, because of course Audi aren't joining the grid until 2026. So I don't personally see where these opportunities are coming, unless, as I said, we get some extreme situation. Logan Sargent doesn't do it at Williams. He's kicked out. Red Bull kick out a driver. We have other fallouts in other teams between drivers and they're moved on, or someone decides to retire. Something has to happen to create these opportunities for drivers like Ricardo and Mick to get a drive in 2024. I have no doubt they'll find test driver opportunities, and like Hulkenberg has been doing for Aston Martin, those opportunities will be there. But for me, unless something big happens, surprising happens, I can't see both of them getting an opportunity for sure. And it could be a case of Daniel Ricciardo versus Mick for one opportunity on the grid in 2024, if that. From my perspective, I can see them both ending up with at least 2 years out of the sport, if not longer. I think in Mick's case, of course, there is longer on his side to eventually get a seat back in F1. But we all know, unless you are a top name like Fernando Alonso, when he left, obviously went and did some IndyCar, but when he made a decision to come back to F1, we knew someone was going to take him. He's Fernando Alonso. Someone on the grid was going to give him an opportunity. And unfortunately for Danny Rick and for someone like Mick Schumacher, they don't have that money in the bank in the sport. They don't have the clamouring from teams to go get him. We will get rid of our driver if it means we can have him. They don't have that, and they haven't earned that. So it's up to them to go and find those opportunities. And if something does happen, if someone does, as a surprise, leave the sport, be there ready to pick up the pieces and dive in to that position. But for me, I'll be very surprised to see both on the grid in 2024. And I think there's a small chance we'll see one of them on the grid in 2024. So we'll again see how that plays out. But the comments from Toto and Mick do, to me at least, suggest that we're likely to see Mick Schumacher take up that role. Maybe not immediately, but partway through the 2023 season as the reserve driver. And maybe he'll do what Ricardo's doing, taking some time off a bit, and maybe only going to X amount of races with someone else, like a Stoffel Van Dorn, filling in the other races where Mick's not there. But for me, it just seems clear that one way or another, there's going to be some sort of relationship between Mercedes and Mick Schumacher in 2023. And finally, then we move on to Nico Hulkenberg, who's done a bit of an interview and explained some of his reasoning why he's chosen now to get back on the grid in Formula One. So he said, after 2019, I think that was what I wanted and what I also needed, a break. So he wanted a break from F1 after 2019. Obviously, I wasn't a third driver or anything, so I really had the time to step back, disconnect from it properly. Then it was COVID time, so not much going on. Once the season 2020 started, soon after that, I came to Silverstone to replace Checo. Obviously, Checo had COVID at the time, but it was good for me to have time away to digest, to reflect on some things, change of perspective a little bit too. This year, I think watching a little harder, especially when you analyse and you see and you think you can do better in places. So he's looking at other drivers and going, I could do better than that. I believe in myself. I think I can do better than them. And that gave him, I think, a bit of impetus to go, you know what? This could be the time for me. So he said, so I started the return project. So he's put a project in place to get himself back on the F1 grid. He then said he's kept a good relationship with people in the paddock, and we've commented on that before. I think one of the things that plays massively into Hulkenberg's hands is that you ask anyone in the F1 paddock about him, they only have positive things to say. He's great to work with. He's great to have in the team. He's got great experience. So everyone has backed him to come back to the F1 grid in terms of internally within the world of F1. I think that's massively helped in his favour, especially against someone like Mick. And he's been known as a straightforward guy with no BS, no burnt soil left anywhere, making a return possible. As we say, he's not burnt any bridges. He's kept his relationships. Everybody loves Nico Hulkenberg within the world of F1, and that's meant that when there was an opportunity like the one at Haas, there was no one who wanted to turn him down. He's unless there was just a clearly better option, no one is outright against hiring Hulkenberg. We've even had Magnussen, his great rival, come out and say he's going to be absolutely fine to work with him. Probably the only guy in F1 who really doesn't like or hasn't liked Hulkenberg in the past. Even he said he's happy to work with him. And of course, he probably knew ahead of time, making those comments, that he was going to have to. So let's not start off on the wrong foot. But still, at least, that bridge has been passed out by Magnussen for them to go and work together in the future. And hopefully they have a positive partnership at Haas next season. So then he's gone on to say the desire to come back on the grid, to go racing, to kick ass is back. So that's just it. He's seen other drivers on the grid. He believes he can do better than them. He feels that fire to come back to the F1 grid, that fire that Ricardo needs to go and find. Hulkenberg took time away from the sport. He's watched from a distance and it's come back to him. His hunger, his need, his fire to be on the F1 grid came back. So he's put a plan together. He's ended up with a drive with the Haas team for next season and beyond, and I'm really happy for him, and I hope he has loads of success, because I am a fan of Hulkenberg's. He's a good, solid driver, and I hope he can prove a point in the Haas next season. Of course, for me, I didn't want him to leave, so I'm sad for Mick, and I'm happy for Hulk. But if Mick can go and get that reserve drive at Mercedes to keep him around the sport and look for a drive in the future, I'd be happy with that. I think him getting the exposure to a team like Mercedes would be brilliant for his career as well, because he'll get to spend time with Russell, with Hamilton, with Toto, and with all the engineers and all the people behind the scenes at Mercedes. It was such a world-class outfit. I think for any driver that's a positive experience, and it might be an enforced experience, an experience he didn't really want because he wanted to be on the grid, but he has to make the most of it. He has to go and make the most of an opportunity to be around a team like Mercedes, and then take that experience and use it as a selling point to a lower team on the grid, to say, I've seen what they do, I've seen how they work, I can bring that experience with me and help you develop to be a better team in F1. That's the opportunity Mick has, and he has to grab it with both hands. Make sure you get that position at Mercedes. It is really important, in my opinion, to his future in F1 that he does. But that's it then. That's all of the latest stories coming out of the world of F1. And as I say, we'll be covering and reacting to all the latest news and headlines from F1, offering genuine fan reaction throughout the off-season and into 2023. So make sure you subscribe on the bottom right-hand side to be notified of all future uploads. Otherwise, I'm just going to thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit a like on the video if you did enjoy it, and make sure to look out for future uploads throughout the off-season whenever anything comes up. Otherwise, just thank you again. Goodbye.